Tonight, Suncor has issued a vague alert about an incident at its refinery in Commerce City, telling neighbors they may hear an alarm or see smoke, but that they don't need to do anything. Suncor shut down the refinery for repairs after a fire in late December that was announced to the public with an identical vague warning message. Suncor has put out that same brief warning twice in the last 12 months. Once after the fire on December 24th that injured 2 employees, and again after another fire on the 27th. Suncor later notified the state that benzene levels, cancer-causing chemical, were past legal limits in Sand Creek. South Adams Fire told us tonight it has not been called to assist Suncor's internal fire department with anything today. The refinery is working toward ramping back up to full operations by March. Today is the once-a-year count of all the people living on the streets of Denver and in shelters. This is part of a nationwide effort that helps divvy up resources to address homelessness. Denver's count will be skewed this year for a few reasons. The extreme cold sends more people indoors. And our Steve Steger learned the hundreds of migrants in Denver shelters will be counted.
We saw a lot of still in the night, through the night.
Quiet.
The cold really does, I think, impact people's decision-making in unsheltered homelessness about when and if to come inside.
Chris Connor with Denver's Department of Housing Stability says the streets weren't all that busy when he and his shift partner went out this morning.
We still saw tent structures, still saw individuals here and there, but there's a lot of what we saw was abandoned, carts and belongings in a street corner that normally would have had somebody there in the morning hours.
Not surprising, because temperatures like we saw last night tend to drive people who would usually stay outside indoors into a shelter or somewhere else.
They may, pool their resources together and get a hotel room, or this might be the one time that they reach out to that friend to see if they can just stay, on their couch overnight.
Kathy Alderman is with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. She says a skewed number on this point in time count could impact the resources service providers get to help.
It is the tool that HUD relies on when assessing whether a continuum of care or the coordinating entity for homelessness services in a given area is doing enough to address homelessness.
It is reported to HUD, which is then put in a report that goes to Congress to help determine funding.
Jamie Reif leads the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, which runs the count and gets that funding to disperse to service providers across the region.
Maybe on a day like today, there's between 6,500 and 7,000 people experiencing homelessness. That's what we had last year was 6,800. But what we see over a year is that there's closer to 28,000.
She'll be the first to tell you this data about one night will never tell you the whole story about what the community needs.
And it is a one-night snapshot and doesn't fully capture really the resources that we need, which tend to be 5 to 6 more times than what we're actually showing to Congress is our need.
Reif told me that there are certainly efforts to get better real-time data about homelessness, including HUD's Homeless Management Information System, which is a database on individuals experiencing homelessness where service providers then can share in-depth details about each case and what each person needs. She says, as a nation, we're not quite there yet when it comes to using that in-depth data. So they've got to rely on this. It's also a chance, really, the survey is a great chance to get out on the street and talk to folks who are going through this. You get a lot more stories, you get a lot more experiences that way. That way you can better your response down the road.
And of course, starting in early December, Colorado's shelter population, Denver metro shelter population, just went up like that with all the migrants coming to.
Absolutely going to be part of the count, because this count looks at anyone who is inside a shelter. They're going to look at emergency shelters. That will probably be in the report, that these are emergency shelters and that these are folks who are coming to this country as part, or coming to Denver as part of the migrant refugee program in Denver. As with other cities across the country, but it's definitely going to be part of the calculation for resources.
Hopefully they look at the fine print, because this is an unusual situation.
Yes, it is. Yeah, because you don't want your number to go up necessarily, because you want to make sure you get the funding.
All right, Steve, thank you. Do you see the Broncos are hiring Sean Payton? I saw that too. Colorado is part of a 6-state compact on water. All in today. All the states in the Colorado River Basin, with the exclusion of California, are on board with a plan to reduce water use. They've hit a deadline set by the feds to come up with a proposal for 15% and 30% reductions. Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, and Arizona have signed on to this new proposal. It only kicks in if water levels in Lake Powell and Lake Mead fall to certain levels. More than 40 million people rely on water from the reservoirs and the power that they generate. Six-state plan also calls for lower basin states to be accountable for evaporation or water loss downriver. Environmental group based out of Boulder, the Western Resource Center, calls this a good first step.
And even though the 6 states did come up with a framework that they agreed upon, it doesn't mean they're done. It does not mean that Colorado can stop moving and stop pushing for additional ways to use less water. All this means is we need to do more, and we need to make sure we're continuing to work with the other basin states and key partners to get that done.
California is expected to present its own plan to the federal government. Mexico and tribal nations within the river basin, they also have not signed on to this 6-state deal. An added challenge to water scarcity now is investors who see drought as an opportunity. For years, investors have been buying up millions of dollars worth of land in western Colorado. The investors include hedge funds like the New York-based Water Asset Management, who said that they see scarce water as the defining resource of this century, like the oil boom of the 1900s. A CBS News investigation into Water Asset Management said their strategy is to buy up farmland and implement more efficient farming practices, then eventually sell off excess water rights to neighbors or government agencies. And they would do that when the others, quote, desperately need it. We caught up with Carrie Donovan, former Democratic state senator, who pushed for updates to the state's water speculation laws. And she says these water investors are being pretty upfront about this. They're gobbling up water rights now to wait until water is more scarce and more valuable.
But what happens when every drop in water is being counted and has a value on it? What we think then is that the investment speculation will see those New York Wall Street firms probably take the lease away from the farmer and sell that water either back to the state, to the federal government, or to, a greater entity that's being formed to find extra water in the state. And those dollars are going to come pretty high and pretty rapidly when we hit that crisis mark.
In 2020, Donovan was part of a commission studying how Colorado could strengthen its water speculation laws against out-of-state investors. The group's recommendations never made it into law because there were disagreements about the language. Coloradans who are fed up with high Xcel Energy bills demanded answers today from the state regulators who approved those rates. Let's listen into how that went.
Mr. Blank, how can we get answers to our questions? Right now, you are very polite and you are pacifying everybody. How can we get answers to our questions? What form do we have to go through? This is obviously not working.
I don't know what to tell you.
That's rough stuff. We added the time clock there. Our Marshall Zellinger explains why state regulators didn't have much to say.
We need some help here, guys.
For a public comment hearing, the Public Utilities Commission is sure getting an earful. This is from 1 hour ago.
Are any of the commissioners on here aware of their bills going up, or does somebody else pay your bills for you and you never see them? I mean, because to me, this is just common sense.
Not funny.
It is not funny.
Of course, we pay our bills and we see what's going on.
That is Commissioner Eric Blank, who has been blank in responses to many of the complaints by Xcel customers, but blank by design.
How can we get answers to our questions? What form do we have to go through? This is obviously not working.
I don't know what to tell you. We have pending cases in front of us, and we function as judges in those cases, and we are not capable of answering questions in forums like this without prejudicing our ability to decide those future cases.
Customers join this online meeting to vent about what comes out of their vents. Actually, the cost of what comes out of their vents.
My bill 2 months ago was $131. My bill a month ago went up to $331. I just got my bill. It's $481.
Not only don't I want you to grant them a new rate increase, I don't even know if this is possible. I'd like you to rescind their natural gas rate increase from 2 months ago.
Yes, the meeting got heated because the response about the cost of heat was limited at best.
How many times has PUC turned down these rate increase requests? I'm a native. I have never heard of them turning down a rate increase.
I'm sorry, in this forum, I'm not able to answer questions, but All I can tell you is I can assure you we're listening.
Xcel Energy has an electricity rate increase request in front of the PUC. If approved, it would increase our electricity bills starting in September. When Commissioner Eric Blank talked about prejudice, I guess he meant any response from the PUC could harm the fairness of those hearings as the PUC considers the rate increase. The recommendation to customers was to reach out to the Utility Consumer Advocate. They're the ones who act as our representative in front of the PUC when challenging the rate increases.
Felt like an unsatisfying exchange.
I think the customers feel that way too because they wanted some back and forth and all they got was, I guess, the fourth. They didn't get anything back.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Marshall.
Colorado's veterinarians agree their industry is in trouble. They're divided over how to fix it.
We are facing a crisis, and it's going to take some bold initiatives to resolve this.
The state is going to get millions of dollars in federal climate funding. The concern is that small communities often get left out. And men, are we okay? I only ask because I keep seeing photos of guys out in the freezing cold without much on. Let's consult a medical professional. Next.
The U.S. is facing a shortage of veterinarians. That includes 25 rural counties in Colorado. There's a controversial proposal to address those shortages by creating an entirely new category of people who would work in veterinary settings. The veterinary professional associate would be like a mid-level practitioner between a vet tech and a veterinary doctor. So kind of like a physician's assistant, but for animals. They'd focus on routine care, not critical situations. Critics of this proposal say it would be confusing for people seeking vet care for their animals and that they would rather focus efforts on trying to retain current staff in the field. We talked with Wayne Jensen, Colorado State professor, longtime supporter of this proposal. He says a position that doesn't require the commitment of full-blown vet school and pays more than a vet tech position, that would help recruiting.
We can actually grow the workforce. Some of the other proposals where it's really important that we do everything possible to address this. So work on the retention of veterinarians, work on the retention of veterinary technicians, but that's not actually growing the workforce. This proposal will grow the workforce.
Colorado's Veterinary Medical Association opposes the idea of creating a whole new position. They say the educational requirements are too vague. They thought that the mid-level techs would require too much assistance from the veterinary doctors. They say they'd rather focus on retention efforts like student loan repayment programs and more training for vet techs. The bipartisan infrastructure bill out of Washington set aside millions of dollars to help communities in Colorado fight the impacts of climate change and extreme weather. According to the Biden administration, it's about $375 million for Colorado. A new study says that small communities might have trouble getting at those funds. Headwaters Economics, a research group focused on community development, says that more than 60% of these so-called resilience funds coming through the infrastructure law requires local governments to match at least some percentage of the federal funding. The study describes that match requirement as a real barrier to rural communities, which either can't afford to match the federal funding or lose out to bigger communities who could put up more money. In 2021, the state allocated $80 million to try and help local communities come up with these match requirements so they can get at the bigger federal pot. The Headwaters study noted that Colorado's taxpayer Bill of Rights, though, keeps local governments from being able to raise the money that they would need for that grant funding.
Well, we had another extremely cold night last night and into this morning before we started to rebound this afternoon. But take a look at overnight lows. We made it to 7 below in Denver areas to the north, 19 below in Greeley, 12 below in Greeley, 20 below in Fort Collins, 20 below in Kremlin, 23 below in Steamboat Springs. So we had some very cold weather that pushed in overnight and into this morning. But the good news is we're starting to rebound. Now, in addition to that, now that we're wrapping up January, we saw a lot of snow, almost double our usual amounts of snow just for January alone, which for the season puts us at almost 37 inches of snow, where we usually see just 27 inches of snow. But right now we're at 8 degrees. It feels like -4 with those winds coming in from the south-southeast at 8 miles per hour. Temperatures are going to continue to warm up as compared to what we saw yesterday. So our 24-hour temperature change maps showing between 10 to 20 degrees warmer. We are dry out there, which is going to stay pretty dry over the next couple of days, allow us to continue to get warmer. Overnight low near 8 degrees tonight, but we will see those temperatures eventually make their way back into the 40s, even upper 40s by this weekend.
No shirt, no shoes, no problem. You could do a scientific study on why guys love to brag about being out in the cold.
Yeah, I don't care how much testosterone or body fat or whatever you have.
We'll talk to someone who's actually studied it next.
Each time we get a cold snap, something happens to a few of us men, the ones who go outside to prove our manhood by running in shorts, shoveling in flip-flops, that kind of thing. And we're honestly curious, is this a gender physiology issue or is it a gender psychology issue? You know what I mean? Are men truly less susceptible to cold, or do us men just want everyone to think we're less susceptible to cold? So we got talking about this because Terry sent us a photo of her husband shoveling snow barefoot. She said it was 10 degrees at the time. Then there are the runners. If we're lucky, they put on shorts. If we're not lucky, they're out there in their tighty whities like that gentleman was. And apparently we start off young because Shailene sent in this photo of her grandson in shorts and snow boots at I don't know what age. So researchers have actually looked into this phenomenon, trying to figure out if men just aren't as susceptible to cold. Han Kim, professor of public health from Utah, ran studies that did find that women's hands and feet tend to run a bit colder than men. But when he says it comes down to freezing temperatures, cold is cold.
Yeah, I don't care how much testosterone or body fat or whatever you have. You know, when it gets to these temperatures, hypothermia and frostbite are a threat to everyone. So I think it has to do with some, probably a little bit of masculinity there, trying to show that they are more resistant to pain and to discomfort, and therefore more masculine.
Kim's research did show that while women tend to have colder hands and feet, they run hotter in their core. So there's a romantic tidbit for Valentine's Day. So guys, do what you do out in the cold. Just know science, and next viewers know it's all in your head. No choice but to sit back and watch the most Colorado thing we saw today. We'll have that and your feedback next. Being at the mercy of the herd, that is the most Colorado thing we've seen today. Joelle from Loveland was telling us she was driving home after a long 12-hour catering gig in Estes when she just had to stop cold on 36 to wait for a huge herd of elk. She estimated that there were hundreds of them in total. They're obviously in no hurry whatsoever, and she said that they just kept coming and coming for about 5 minutes while she sat and waited. That is actually pretty cool. Finish with your feedback as always. Travis says, sitting in on that PUC meeting, this is that regulators looking at Xcel's billing, sitting in on that Zoom meeting was the best hour and a half of wasted time. He says, I think I'll do it again to hear more one-sided conversations when it restarts at 6:30. KC drops this. Here's an idea. We could all stop paying our Xcel bills. Don't do that. Then they can tap into their earnings to offset the lack of income. This could be a wake-up call. We are the customers and have some power. Casey, don't do that. Other people don't do that. We have some power. Yeah, you won't have power if you do that. That's not the way that this is going to get settled, but we'll keep watching the issue, and we'll see you next time.